Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio.
And Chris in the Newscast studio.
And Lyse Doucet is in the Newscast studio.
And joining us this week is Stephanie Flanders from Bloomberg.
It's a delight to see you all.
And a delight to have you here.
Now, you launched that podcast, Trumponomics, didn't you? Did you foresee oil heading towards, $200 a barrel as a result of Donald Trump?
We have, had plenty to talk about since Donald Trump came back to office, and that is just the least of it, I would say.
Right, lots to discuss as the conflict in the Middle East enters its fourth week. Lyse, you and I have convened most days on various BBC programmes, 5 Live, Newscast, to try and work out if there are negotiations between the Americans and the Iranians. Where have you got to after 4 days of trying to work it out?
Everyone's going to switch off from this program now because you've just said that we've asked the same question for the last 4 days.
I mean, there has been a different answer every day.
Still don't have an answer. It's a difference of definition, but it's also a difference in the understanding of what constitutes diplomacy. That President Trump has been saying for days, very strong talks with Iran, and there's serious negotiations. And every day the Iranians say there are no talks and there are no negotiations. And I think what we hear from Iranians and others who are part of this mediation process, because a lot of third parties involved, is that there are no talks per se. But today we did get more details. Today, for the first time, we had a confirmation from Steve Witkoff, President Trump's favorite envoy, that they did put forward what he called a 15-point plan, which could be the basis of a peace plan. And we do know, and he confirmed that it was going through Pakistan. And we think that is the main channel now, that Pakistan, of course, is Iran's neighbor. They have very good country-to-country ties, despite strains every so often. And it does seem that the Army chief, who's a field marshal, Asim Munir, actually knows the man that President Trump hints he's talking to or wants to that there's talks already taking place with Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, who is Speaker of the Parliament and also has played key roles in all the main security institutions. So those proposals seem to be going back and forth. So I think it's important that a channel has been opened. But let me finish by saying, if you look at those 15 points from President Trump's team, 5 points from Iran teams, they are maximalist demands. There is zero chance that they will be accepted by the other side. And quite frankly, they really don't seem to set the stage for serious negotiations.
And Stephanie, the world markets seem to react to every kind of microsecond of extra news or analysis about what these negotiations or talks or back channels could be.
Yes.
Also in quite wild ways as well.
So if Adam and I are confused, are the markets confused?
I think they're confused. It depends. I mean, I think what the markets have stopped doing is listening to every word that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth, because that is certainly something, tends to be vary even in the same sentence, let alone in the same day. We did see oil prices go back up, though, today, because I think there was a general feeling that there is nothing, to Lisa's point, there's nothing that's coming out of the White House or our attempts to back up what's being said by the White House that suggests that an agreement is anywhere close. And I think, with the Iranians particularly focused on, will there be a ceasefire they can actually believe in, as opposed to a period of pause before they then get attacked again? All the urgency seems to be on the US side. And that's kind of the extraordinary thing about where we are. Iran seems to have an incentive to have this war continue, amazingly, despite the attacks on its country, because of being able to take the global economy hostage via the Strait of Hormuz, because of all these things that we know about. And it's the US that really wants it to stop.
And Lyse, the meme, the diplomatic meme I keep seeing from observers is that Iran is playing a weak hand very well.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? And this is what the military would call an asymmetric war. President Trump and his Secretary of War, today he nailed the plaque onto the Defense Ministry to say, take us seriously. I am the Secretary of War. I'm not the Secretary of Defense. And he pumps out all the statistics and that 92% of the Navy's gone. And President Trump has been saying, even from almost the very first days of the war, that the war has been won. We've completely destroyed. There are 100% of the military assets of Iran are destroyed, and yet, as they say on social media, with the 0% that Iran has, it is still able to fire missiles into Israel, lower rate, but it's still firing, and to fire into Gulf states. The way this war is, and this is, every war unfolds on two levels. It unfolds on the ground, but it also unfolds in terms of the battle for the narrative. And this is the first artificial intelligence war. So both sides are trollers in chief as well. And the memes, people are saying that Iran should be heading Netflix now because they're doing Lego animations, they did movies. But more seriously, both sides say, and they absolutely believe that they're winning. So President Trump says, we've defeated them. And you know what Stephanie said? They're desperate for a deal. And Iran says, we've defeated the United States and we're desperate for a deal. Iran has done what they call horizontal escalation. And it is quite astonishing that they have suffered extraordinary losses. That seems factual. Of their ballistic missile program, military bases, a whole range of leaders assassinated, both top commanders as well as top officials. But they have changed this from what they themselves described as an existential battle when it started. President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu talking very clearly about regime change. And now it's a battle for the Strait of Hormuz. They have weaponized the world's critical waterway. So they are now fighting a completely different war on a completely different terrain.
And that is their one card.
Yes.
So I think it's not the case. They've always had this one potentially strong card. And what this conflict has taught them is that they can deploy it incredibly effectively and incredibly cheaply. I mean, when you talk about asymmetry, and we tend to say, the other phrase is, they're on the wrong side of the US are on the wrong side of the cost curve. Mm-hmm. But, the drones.
That's very Bloomberg.
The drones that
we love your Bloomberg phrase.
In other words, because the Iranian drones are very cheap and do quite a lot of damage.
You're taking down the cost. So take even the mines, right?
Yeah.
What's the cost to the US of actually reopening the Strait of Hormuz? Well, potentially enormous, and more than any of the number of troops that are currently on the way there could potentially do. How many mines does Iran need to actually create a minefield in Strait of Hormuz? Potentially none.
Because the threshold of risk for the insurance companies that insure the tankers is very, very low.
And the drones are very easy to produce and cheap to produce and can be produced in very non-military looking sites, very normal kind of industrial factories. So then you have to broaden out the number of things that you're hitting in Iran. So the asymmetry, both in the ability to withstand the war, but also the cost of it, is quite extreme. And by the way, Iran is benefiting from the rise in the oil price, and its oil is going through. It's just other US allies' oil that's not getting through. It's effectively Iran has sanctioned the US.
Well, yeah, because if you're China or India, you can have a tanker going through the Strait of Hormuz.
Yes.
Which suggests there aren't any mines there at all.
They are.
Well, they're being escorted,
yes.
or they're being pointed which ways to go. Yeah. It's a bit unclear what's happening.
Brings us back. I mean, we can bring Chris in here because, Sir Keir Starmer's hesitation to join this war, because this discussion, again, raises that absolutely crucial question about why did they go to war and what was the planning for this war? Because even though President Trump continues to say, we knew this was going to happen in the Strait of Hormuz, the way every day they seem to come... eye roll from Bloomberg.
They don't act like they knew this was going to happen.
They just seem, I mean, I know this sounds really cruel, but they seem to be making up as they go along, bringing thousands more Marine from Japan, sending in troops from the 82nd Airborne Division. It really sounds like they just were not prepared for this option.
Yeah, and the Prime Minister, whilst facing difficult questions about UK defence budgets and where UK defence assets are deployed, whether it's to the Mediterranean or to the High North. The Prime Minister's in Helsinki at the moment, talking to the Joint Expeditionary Force, and a big conversation that feels very January, which is about kind of the High North and Greenland and where we were just a couple of months ago in terms of the conversation that was then circulating around President Trump. He is absolutely of the view that he feels he strategically called the UK's position right in terms of those big questions that remain live now about what the end game is, what the objective is. And then the wider question that circulates now, picking up on the conversation of this last couple of minutes, which is that Iran outwardly remains powerful and influential in terms of shaping this conflict and the knock-ons for the global economy. With the wider question, I guess, for newscasters, Lyse, of the seeming sustainability of the Iranian regime able to continue prosecuting an argument around the Straits of Hormuz and also its longevity, which seems fair. Is that fair?
Well, the big question is, ever since, and especially this year, where you had this major protest wave across Iran, and everyone said, "Was the regime what's going to happen to the regime? Can this bring down? Can this bring down the government?" But there were no mass defections. There were no cracks, and there certainly wasn't collapse. And so far, we haven't seen any defections. There have been some reports that some police officers haven't been showing up for work, but there's so far no cracks, certainly not collapse, and certainly not capitulation. And remember, even before the war was started, President Trump mused to his envoy Steve Witkoff that he was curious as to why Iran hadn't surrendered, because in facing with, even before they used it, U.S. military might, which the Iranians then trolled him. The foreign minister put a flag up and saying, we are Iranian. That was the first indication of President Trump's misunderstanding of Iran. And it seems to have this capacity. It has been preparing for years for this. They knew this war was coming. So the layers of succession are layers deep. Today, the Israelis assassinated. Their intelligence is stunning. So today they got the head of the Navy. They had got the head of Navy intelligence and other senior officials in the Navy.
And also the Israelis pitched that operation to take out those officials as a way of opening the Strait of Hormuz. So rather than an airstrike on a facility, it's an airstrike on individual people making decisions.
And it's like you get Caroline Leavitt, who's the White House spokesperson last night. And again, they're incredulous because they think, we're America. We're the best army in the world. And Caroline Leavitt goes, but they've been defeated. How come they're not giving in? They don't understand. They really, there's a huge gap in understanding and a huge gap in trust.
Is there an apparent contradiction there? Because on the one hand, it would appear that Israeli intelligence is incredibly good and therefore incredibly close to the levers of power within Iran and where particularly significant figures are geographically so they can be targeted. And yet there seems to be a sustainability, a durability to the regime. Is that a contradiction? I don't know.
I think we probably should also exercise some humility. We don't have what we know is they're still standing. We don't know how hard it is for them to communicate. We've heard that, and they've talked about this, that they decentralized the command and control, it's called Mosaic system, so that when the war started, they wouldn't have to always be referring to Tehran because they knew it would be difficult to communicate. And whenever there's a threat from President Trump or there's an attack, Iran immediately retaliates, which again says they haven't lost completely their capacity.
Two people died in Abu Dhabi today, didn't they?
Yes.
As a result of the interceptors.
Yeah. And finally, with this, they all know they have a bullseye on them. There was a report saying that the Americans had taken Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi off the kill list and taken this Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf off the kill list.
So that they'd be available for negotiations.
Yes. But this disconnect, as you say, about sort of seeming to make it up as it goes along, I mean, Israel seems to be much clearer, and I think possibly because of its greater intelligence, is believing that this is going to be a long and has to be a continued attack. I mean, you partly wonder with the extent of the intelligence penetration they have, whether they're just waiting for a Mossad agent to be declared the supreme leader, which is surely a matter of time. But when you hear Donald Trump talk about it, it's this extraordinary thing of like, well, we could have talked to him, but, well, the Israelis will probably kill him too. You know, there's this the lack of... he seems relaxed with a degree of lack of coordination that the US has just never seen in any of its in any conflict.
But going back to the economics, I'm thinking of big shocks to the world economy that we've all lived through. So the financial crash of 2008, you could feel the panic. You could see the panic in Canary Wharf. The COVID lockdowns, you could feel the panic about, our government's going to be able to borrow any money anymore. This is serious. The full-scale Russian invasion and the surge in oil prices, you could feel panic. I'm not feeling panic from the world financial system, even though I keep being told it's really bad.
Our yardsticks for these things have been somewhat distorted by the events of the
so
last
it's all relative.
years. And we would probably think this was pretty dramatic if we hadn't lived through all the things that you just described in recent past. But I mean, I think it's the sort of worst of all kind of shocks in a sense, because it doesn't feel like as dramatic as something like COVID, where people accept this is going to be a major hit and people are going to be hurt. But unfortunately, in real time, if you're Rachel Reeves, you're looking at an awful lot of your forecast going out the window. I mean, we're even seeing it, the very short-term inflation forecast. You have these nowcasts which predict just what this month's inflation is going to be. And they're about half a percentage point higher for March than they were at the start. So we've already seen that immediate impact from the oil price. I think from the kind of volatility you've seen in markets, from the uncertainty, from the change in our expectations around interest rates, all of which dates to this, the attack on Iran in 4 weeks ago, that translates into probably half a percentage point off growth and a non-negligible chance of a recession for the UK this year, which we've seen people talk about this week. So that is it doesn't feel maybe dramatic enough for you, I know.
Well,
but,
no, I don't want it to be dramatic. I'm just using it as an indicator for how worried I should be as a human being. Also, Stephanie, I'm just thinking again back to the recent past, and that you can't fight the old conflicts in the modern day. But politicians are usually a bit behind the curve, aren't they? They talk a good talk about, oh, this is what we're going to do, and then the world throws more stuff at them, and they have to be more ambitious or do more. Or
I mean, I think the difficulty about this is that it is, at least from a lot of perspectives, inexplicable. I mean, it's one of the US decision to do this, for all the reasons that we've discussed, and given all of the sort of gaming of different scenarios that US administrations had done, that security and intelligence people in the US had done for decades, more or less since the Iranian Revolution. Every time they gamed out some kind of intervention in Iran, it had ended with, or even begun with, the closing of the Strait of Hormuz and enormous uncertain costs and difficulties. And that's why successive administrations hadn't done it. So I think you'd be forgiven. It's true that, whenever Donald Trump sort of sends troops and aircraft carriers to a region, he tends to want to use them. But the idea that you were going to have this kind of severe attack, I think, just seemed improbable to people because, and not least because, I mean, we may get onto this, it's so counterproductive in terms of some of the other things that are happening. If you raise the oil price, well, for a start, you help Iran and it's getting a lot of its oil through. You hurt some of your biggest allies if they're not able to get their oil through. Although Saudi Arabia is able to send quite a lot of oil through the Red Sea.
The other direction.
And you are helping Russia significantly at a time when probably the economic pressure on Russia a few months ago was greater than it's been at any time since it invaded Ukraine. So if you're the Treasury, it was sort of reasonable to at least anticipate that you wouldn't have this degree of conflict so fast and so suddenly.
And is it helping Russia because Russia, which was a bit of a pariah as an oil provider, is now like Putin's the go-to guy because he's got loads of it?
I mean, before this, it was looking at a major discount on the oil it was selling because of the sanctions. That was meaning it was looking at a big budget deficit. The cost of the war, becoming a complete war economy, was really weighing on the financial sector. Ukraine was actually making some progress on the battlefield, even though, of course, Ukrainian cities were suffering enormously from lack of heat and other things. There was, again, some cautious optimism from the Ukrainian side. That's all completely reversed now. The Russian oil is now either has no discount or is able to charge a premium. It sold some oil to India this week at a premium over the world price.
Right.
Its budget deficit, if these oil prices continue for any length of time, it's more or less disappeared. And of course, you've also got the eyes of the world, almost entirely, and including most of this podcast, talking about Iran, and certainly much less talk in the US of potentially doing anything to help Ukraine. So this is it has had probably that's the biggest sort of consequence, which other countries who are supportive of Ukraine now have to try and deal with.
And Chris, talking about the rewiring, we're now learning maybe what the future demands on the British Navy might be, because today you've got Keir Starmer in Finland with this Joint Expeditionary Force, which is his group of like-minded northern countries in Europe. They're talking about upping their commitment to the Arctic to, as you said earlier on, assuage Donald Trump's concerns about the Arctic from January. But then you've also got Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron on the phone to each other about a marine task force for the Strait of Hormuz when there is a peace deal to get things moving again. That seems like two quite big new commitments. And by the way, we're going to be boarding more Russian dodgy oil tankers in British waters as well. Yeah. So that's 3 new missions just today.
Quite. And so it's no surprise that whenever I speak to anybody broadly in defence circles, by the way, of almost any political affiliation, but at the moment, clearly, those around the Labour government, talking about how important it is when they get the chance, and at the moment there is quite a lot of chance, but maintaining that conversation about how our defence posture in the coming decades, in other words, beyond any particular government, is going to be in a very different place and trying to win that argument. And that's clearly not an easy argument to win when you're also talking about NHS pressures. Oh, and by the way, some more strikes coming up in England in a couple of weeks' time. So the Prime Minister in Helsinki, as you say, with this wider discussion, and then this argument that we heard John Healey, the Defence Secretary, making this morning around what's known as Russia's shadow fleet. Again, we're getting to how Russia transports oil around the world. And I think quite a significant, it's not happened yet, but as and when it does, it'll be quite a significant moment. This decision taken, signed off by the Prime Minister, that they believe is legal, where British forces could board Russian ships passing through, for instance, the English Channel, if they are deemed to be illegally transporting sanctioned Russian oil. But how you go about doing that, and the special forces that you are potentially putting in harm's way in so doing, and then are these boats, these ships transported to British ports, etc., etc. Anyway, that is now a live possibility. We're told by the Ministry of Defence that it's likely to happen soon. So that becomes a thing down the track, because either it does happen with who knows what consequence, or it doesn't happen, and the question will be, well, why not? Because these ships are still moving around.
I wonder whether he's talking to Donald Trump about that, because that's what they were doing in the run-up to the Venezuela operation.
Well, indeed,
and bombing.
And that particular ship that had changed it from memory, had changed how it was flagged on its route. And of course, you can see these things happening some way off because they don't travel wildly fast. But then you can make a decision about what you're going to do and what response you might get if you board a particular boat, etc.
I think that was the point. So my understanding is that was why there'd been so much concern before this. There was a rationale for boarding, which you could also say you could say it was environmental regulations. There's lots of sort of reasons you could potentially board, but there was just this uncertainty and fear about how Russia would respond. And it just show, if it does happen, to your point, just shows that threshold has been crossed, because there's this desperation to have Russia not gain quite so much from this other conflict.
Quite.
At least it's speculation, but we do have a fair idea about the Russian playbook. How might Russia respond against Britain if British commandos are boarding a Russian shadow ship in the English Channel? If there is an escalation?
I don't know. What is the playbook? We seem to be having a whole new library now of things that are happening. We don't.
Well, mystery drones over Scandinavian airports.
Standoff. I would imagine that they won't take it lightly, and it's one of those things where you have to not just do something, but be seen to be doing something in order to establish deterrence. It's all about deterrence, isn't it? To ensure it doesn't happen again.
Adam, can I throw in just an extra little sidebar curveball?
A sidebar curveball.
Well, in the sort of multi-layered overlapping elements of all of the stories that we've been kicking around, whether it be Iran and Russia, there was a report published this week into alleged foreign interference in UK politics by a guy called Philip Rycroft, a former civil servant. There was one particular line in it which I was just reminded of in the conversation, which I just pulled up on my phone around all of this. Asked for examples of what Iran has been doing, he said, this is Philip Rycroft, that the day after Iran's internet went down, the number of posts about Scottish independence dropped by a quarter.
Yes.
So just throw into the mix in the
what they've been up to.
Yeah, in the
and
context
that's not
of,
because Iranian citizens are weirdly interested in devolution.
Yes.
That's an unlikely explanation.
Yeah.
So just throw that into the mix and the swirl of all of this.
And yes.
Anyway, the newscasters might ponder.
And Stephanie, I was going to give you the last word, because I remember chatting to a diplomat in my previous life who'd worked for a European Prime Minister for a long time, and he said something that really stuck in my mind. He said that when there's a crisis and the pressure is building in the boiler, you can never predict which gasket is going to blow where, and it's unusual things that take people by surprise. Is there a particular thing you're looking at, or that you might think, oh, that'll be the thing that will pop that maybe we're not taking into account? I mean, I'm getting you to predict the future now.
Well, you're getting me to, what's the really unpredictable thing that no one's expecting?
Yeah, go ahead, predict it. The unknown unknown.
That is the classic thing.
No, but is there something that is sort of...
It's actually, I think when it comes to the economy and the oil price and whatever, actually the Strait of Hormuz, which is a very obvious thing, it really is important how long that stays partially or effectively closed. I remember in the first week of the conflict, We had on Trumponomics, we talked with the chief emerging market economist and also Javier Blas, who's this fantastic commodities expert and commentator. He just said they've got 4 days to reopen the strait.
Right.
And if they can't reopen it in 4 days, that's when you start seeing it. And of course, that 4 days has long since passed. We've already passed the sort of short, sharp shock aspect. But it's the length of time. It's not even sort of the intensity. When it comes to the oil, it's the length of time this is closed, because that also means you have a backlog. You know, how you quickly can you get everything through? How would have been passing through all of this time. So it's not exactly an exciting sort of whatever your phrase, the gasket that's going to blow.
Not
But
my
I think
I will add something.
It's a slow burn.
I'll add a curveball.
Blow a gasket.
Just when we're told, when everyone's
curved
getting up,
gasket.
just when everyone is getting off their maps to find, and this drives us mad, the straits. It's not the straits. It's one strait.
Singular.
The Strait of Hormuz. There's another, joker in the pack or curveball, whatever. The Houthis have been on standby. Remember a few years ago, the Americans and the British were bombing the Houthis because they had been blocking the Red Sea. And from what we understand is Iran has said, hold fire to the Houthis. Don't get involved yet. And now there's an indication that the Houthis are going to join the fight. And then, therefore, it won't just be about the Strait of Hormuz. It will also be about the alternative routes, which involve the Red Sea.
And Saudi Arabia is getting about $3 or $4 million a day, barrels a day through the Red Sea. So it's actually managing to get out a lot of what it has been producing. So that would be
and with both of those things, you think, how long does it take to then get back to a level of confidence where things can flow normally?
But this is the point. So you have this card that has now been played, and Iran has learnt that it can play very cheaply. Once it's been closed once, it can be closed again.
Well,
so there
this
is
is
a
the
legacy
concern.
of this conflict for future presidents, let alone Donald Trump, let alone the rest of us.
My version of the gasket was going to be that the best joke on the new British version of Saturday Night Live, which was on Sky last Saturday, was about a shortage of helium. And that's a reference to the Strait of Hormuz being closed because so much of the world's helium goes through there. And you don't just need helium to do funny gags with your voice or to blow up someone's balloon for a birthday. It's used in lots of important industrial processes. Stephanie, thanks for coming in.
Great to be back.
Lyse, good to see you for what feels like the 900th day in a row.
Always a pleasure.
And Chris, good to catch up with you too.
Thanks, Adam.